All right, this video, and probably the ones that are following it, the next, I don't know, who knows, 2, 3, 4, whatever it is, are very important, and are ones I've been meaning to do for a long time, on death, hell, and the afterlife. Going to start here with death and sleep. Now, I'm going to start off with addressing the beliefs of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and where they say in here that dying is akin to sleeping. It's just going to sleep. Spoiler alert, the Adventists have it backwards. Truly backwards. Death is not sleep. Sleep is death. And it's final, but you're going to see that. Adventists have it completely wrong. So we're going to start here with the 28 Beliefs book, as I seem to always use a lot. So look with me here at this book. Very same book that I just held up, the one I use all the time, the newest copyright date, that is 2018, you can see there. And these are the verses that the Adventists used to say, here death equals sleep, from the Old Testament. We're going to do the same thing with the New Testament, but we're going to start here with the Old Testament. And look what they say in the red underlined text. Referring to the deaths of the Old Testament, describes David, Solomon, and other kings of Israel and Judah as sleeping with their forefathers. And then they list about, I think it's like 12 verses here. Now, you just saw those 12 verses in this book. This is what Seventh-day Adventists use to prove that when you die, you're really not dead, you just go to sleep. You know, what they don't tell you, because they're either ignorant, which is possible, or they're deceptive, which is also possible, is that they use the word sleep in all these verses that they just showed us here. We look it up in the King James, and it says sleep. But you know what they don't tell you? It's 3 completely different Hebrew words when you look up the actual word for sleep. The SDA doctrine is built on an antiquated English translation of the Bible, the KJV, who does use sleep, and some other translations use sleep too. Modern translations have corrected it, by the way, and they don't use the word sleep, they just say died. So you see, if the Seventh-day Adventists were to build their doctrine on anything other than a 400-plus-year-old translation, their doctrine would fall apart, as it's going to in this video. So, we're going to see, does death mean sleep, as the SDA's claim in this book? Well, you know what we're going to see? We're going to see, once again, the original languages, in this case, next case, Hebrew, and then you're going to see Greek, is absolutely going to refute Adventism. So let's look at the original words, original Hebrew words, that are all translated as sleep in the KJV. Look with me here. Here are the 3 original words, sakab, shana, and yashan. And you can see sakab, as the first one we're going to examine, has, I think it's 7 of the 12, most of them there. So we're going to start with the first one, sakab, which is 7 of the 12 verses. And we're going to say, does the Hebrew tell us that death is like going to sleep? Let's look here. Before we look there, I'm going to show you what we're going to use today. I'm going to start off with, in this discussion on the Hebrew, using this New International Dictionary Old Testament Theology. Sits behind me on my shelf here. 5-volume set. You're going to see this is an Adventist approved set. The next set of books that we're going to go over, I think the next one in order is probably going to be Vine's Expository Dictionary, another Adventist approved one, and you'll see that on screen here too. And I'm going to use another set of lexicons. These are my absolute favorite for the Greek, by the way. Authors are Lowe and Nita. This is just the introduction. This is the actual lexicon itself. But we're going to use this 2-volume set, which is absolute dynamite. We are going to start here in this video with volume 4 in this set here. Look with me here on screen. Here's volume 4, and you can see copyright 1997, and like I said, it's Adventist approved. I got 6 favorable citations. The oldest, Ministry Magazine, the newest Advent Review from 2020. So let's look at sakab. Remember, that's the very first word we're going to look at. There's sakab, and there it is in the dictionary. You can see it's the same Hebrew word, and it has different meanings. And you can read with me here in the torn out page on the bottom. It says what? Within the general range of lie down, this common verb is used 212 times, expressed to express a variety of nuances, such as preparing to go to sleep, like you're going to bed, or lodging at night, when you're staying away in a lodge, or die, or have sexual intercourse. By the way, the have sexual intercourse and the things related to that were a huge part of the definition in this. So we're not interested in the sexual intercourse or preparing to go to bed or holding up in a lodge or a tavern. We're interested in die. Let's look and see what die is defined as. And it defined is here as what? Since death is often alluded to as sleep, it seems only natural that a verb that speaks of lying down in preparation for sleep should become a metaphor for death. Look here, Seventh-day Adventist, 28 beliefs, wrong. Death is not sleep. Sleep is death. Sleep is a metaphor for death. Let's move on to volume 2. Very same set, virtually the same copyright, of course. And for the next two words that are used for sleep, they're both in the same section of the book. Both Yashan and Sana. You can see them here. And you can see how the words are used. And you can see, especially on the bottom, Psalm 13:3, that the Adventist that you even cited, Psalm 13:3 in here, I think is an absolute embarrassment. Why? Because we're going to read Psalm 13:3 right now. And what does it say? This is David. Look at Psalm 13:3. Consider and answer me, Lord my God. Light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. What? David's talking about sleeping the sleep of death. Death is not actually, look at this verse. Sleep is a description of death. David knows that sleep is a description of death. David is teaching you, Seventh-day Adventists, what Psalm 13:3 actually says, but you cited him correctly. Death is not a description of sleep. Let's continue in this book and read the definition for death. For both Yashan, here it says Yashan, may also be used as a metaphor for death. There it is again, it's death. Then it says, contra, on the other hand, those who see sleep as a form of death, it would seem more accurate to describe death in the Old Testament as prolonged sleep from which there is no awakening, which is death, of which there is no awakening. So it's not temporary. And then it goes on to say the metaphor, and that's what this whole thing is. Sleep is a metaphor for death. This metaphor developed naturally in many languages and cultures for the similarities of one who is deceased to one being asleep. Here we go again. The right way is going to sleep. Oh, that's death. You're dead. The wrong way is the Seventh-day Adventists who think death is some kind of suspension in sleep. All right. You just saw all three Hebrew words and their variations translated as sleep in the KJV, but which actually mean death. Adventists have it completely backwards. But, this problem of the KJV describing death as sleep has been corrected in modern translations. Let me show you a few of them here. These are just three of the verses the Adventist side. I didn't use them all, I just picked three. But, after this, David died, Solomon died, Jeroboam died. Of course, in the KJV it says, David slept, Solomon slept, Jeroboam slept. No, it's not. It's they died. Modern translations have corrected this. Remember, I want you to remember this. Only use your KJV, and I only use my KJV when I am talking to people who are at least 400 years old. That's when you should use your KJV. Now we get to do the same thing for the New Testament citations that they do. So the 28 beliefs here is going to cite 8 verses to prove that dying is really, it's not dying, it's sleeping. Again, the SDA build their doctrine on a faulty 400 plus year old translation. You know what? And of course you shouldn't do so. But here's another thing, same thing. What they don't tell you, or they don't know, is that when the New Testament, when it's used for sleep, there are 3 different Greek words for sleep. All translated as the one word sleep in here, but there's 3 different Greek words because there's 3 different meanings. And you're going to see the 3 different meanings. And 3 different meanings are going to refute Adventism, as The original languages always do. So let's look here. 28 beliefs. Now the New Testament piece. And the New Testament, let's read these red lines, because not everybody actually dies here. The New Testament uses the same imagery. In describing the condition of Jairus' daughter who was dead, I guess she wasn't dead, Christ said she was sleeping in Matthew 9:24 and Mark 5:39. I'm going to address those specifically later, and you'll see those on the slide. Then it goes on to say he referred to the deceased Lazarus in a similar name. Matthew wrote that many saints who had fallen asleep were raised. After Christ's resurrection and recording in Stephen's martyrdom, Luke wrote that he fell asleep. All right, that's Acts 7:16. Paul and Peter also called death a sleep, and then he cites those verses. Here are the actual Greek words, and you can see in the boxes below it are where the Adventists say that, well, this is going to sleep. Now, we're going to start with the very first one, koiomo, and you're going to see that the Greek does not tell us that dying is going to sleep. We're going to start here with Vine's Expository Dictionary. So let's look here right now at Vine's. And there's the same book that I just held up. And of course, you know it's Adventist approved with 10 favorable citations. Thank you, Seventh-day Adventist. And when we open it up to look at death, we got a whole bunch of different Greek words. But the one with the red arrow is koiomo. That's the one that the Seventh-day Adventist cited in the 28 Beliefs book. So let's look at koiomo. And koiomo says what? It's a metaphor for death. It should be translated as be dead. Here we go again. Wrong. Death is not sleep, but you know what is right? Sleep is death. Now we are going to move to my favorite Greek lexicon by Ioannida. Look with me here on screen. Here is that Ioannida lexicon, both the volumes you saw. Of course, it is an Adventist-approved citation book with 4 favorable citations used by Seventh-day Adventist. And for the word necros, which is only used once, necros is what? Pertaining to being dead, lifeless. Necros. Yeah, and you can already, some of you all could already figure out necros, necronomacy, necro, always the dead. It's the dead. There's nothing here, and you see in this citation from 23.121 that says sleep. It's being dead. Let's move on in the same book and address the next and the last Greek word, kutheto. And what's it say here? It's a euphemistic expression for the state of being dead. I want you to read that there again. It doesn't say of being dead. It's the state of being dead, or it could mean to have died. This is a very important distinction that I'm going to go over here with you in a minute. Read the next paragraph in this same citation. Some translators have attempted to preserve the figure of speech, kutheto, by translating to sleep rather than to have died or to be dead. Such a practice, however, has resulted in misunderstandings in a number of instances and has sometimes led to the doctrine of the so-called soul sleep. Oh no, Seventh-day Adventist, you just got called out by Ioannida for your faulty doctrine, which you build on a 400-year-old translation, which has been corrected by modern translations. But remember what I said in that one definition? I said, look at it closely and look at it carefully, because it says a state of being dead, and as opposed to actually being dead. There's a reason why it says a state of being dead. Look with me here. Here's the 3 verses Adventists cited for Matthew, Mark, and John. Because all of these cases here, these people weren't really dead. Like the kings in the Old Testament who got lowered into the grave. None of these people saw the grave at this time. Well, they saw it later, but not at this time. It was a state of being dead. That's why the Greek word is kutheto. That's why it's a different Greek word. They weren't really dead. They looked like they were dead. All 3 Greek words translated as sleep simply mean death, except, perhaps those last 3 that we just looked at. Death is not sleep, but sleep is death. And because sleep is death, Seventh-day Adventist, you ought to be very scared right now. Because when you attend Seventh-day Adventist funerals and they tell you, oh, our little friend, sister, what's her name? She's just sleeping. No, she's dead. And you ought to wonder where she is now, because she's dead. she ain't sleeping. And that's why having this doctrine and having it backwards and wrong in Seventh-day Adventism is absolutely serious. But again, these are the kind of problems you get when you build your theology on a 400-year-old translation. But it has been corrected. Let me just give you 3 examples. Here they are. Modern translation, International Standard Version. KJV says sleep here in all these, but you know what? It's been corrected here. Died, 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 died. That's it. Everyone died, no one slept. Remember, when you use a KJV, you should only use it when you have Bible discussions with those that are 400 years old, and that's it. So, in summary, everyone died, except the resurrected, those 3 verses where the people were resurrected only appeared to have died. They didn't die. That's why it's a different Greek word. Other than that, everybody died, went into the grave. Sleep is an antiquated translation. Yeah, you know what? I know that they knew what sleep meant 400 years ago. But the Adventists are even twisting what they meant 400 years ago in terms of the KJV. So, they're building this theology not on the actual meaning of the words, which we just looked at here in lexicons, the actual meanings. They're building it on a 400-year-old translation. Reckless and foolish at best. Adventism has been defeated once again by the Greek and Hebrew, like it always is. Of course, like I said, it's been corrected in modern translations. Just look them up. It doesn't use sleep anymore. Or if it does, it's very few. It's gone. Now, I'm going to move on to one premier SDA proof text. We are going to be very, 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 very bad Adventists. We're going to read a passage of text. We're not going to read a verse. We're going to read the passage. I don't like reading long passages online on video, but this topic, this passage is important and familiar to all you former Adventists. So we're going to look at Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verses 1 through 10, which is so easy to understand if you just read the text. Let's read the text now. But all this, I laid to heart. Stop here for a minute. I want to stop. By the way, Ecclesiastes and the author. You're going to see me use a name called Colette. I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing it 100% correctly. Scholarly community is unclear on who the author of Ecclesiastes is. Some say it's Solomon, but there's reasons to say it's not Solomon, that it's this other person, and some even say that the name Colette is not even a name, it's more of something else, it's a pseudonym. I'm not going to get into any of that here. All right, I did all my research on that. I discovered that. I know that. So you're going to see me use that name because that's the name often attributed to the author of Ecclesiastes. Colette, K-O-H-E-L-E-T, something like that. I'm not sure. You may even see it on the slide. Let's go back to Ecclesiastes 9:1 through 10. But all this I laid to heart, examining it all, how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God. Whether it's love or hate, man does not know. Both are before him. It's the same for all. Same event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good and the evil, to the clean, to the unclean, and him who sacrifices, and whom who does not sacrifice as the good one, so is the sinner, and he who swears is that he who shuns an oath. This is an evil that in all that is done under the sun. Under the sun. That's on earth. That the same event happens to all. Also, the hearts of the children of man are full of evil, and madness is in their hearts when they live, and after that, they go to the dead. But he who has joined with all the living has hope, for a living dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know not that they will die, but for the let me read line 5 again. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. And they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Their love, their hate, their envy have already perished, and forever they have no more share in all that is done under the sun. Next section. Therefore, he basically says, go, eat your bread with joy, drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. Let your garments be always white, let not oil be lacking on your head, enjoy life with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life and in your toil, and in which you toil under the sun. Whatever your hand does find to do, do it with your might, For there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which you are going. Whew. Let's look at this whole section here again. Look with me here. It's in two pieces. 9:1 to 9:6 addresses the common fate for all of mankind. Verses 7 through 10 is the call to enjoy life. So I'm going to address the first 6 verses and the common fate that all mankind faces. By the way, you know what that common fate is? Death. That's it. That's a common theme in this book. It's death. It's not a theological statement on what's going to happen in the afterlife in 9:5. The common theme is death. All that's done under the sun, and when all is done and over, death. And the theme is repeated in Ecclesiastes chapter 2 and chapter 3. Let's look at chapter 2, verses 12 through 17. 14. Yet I perceive the same thing happens to all. And who's the all? The wise and the fool. The wise man, foolish man, and what they do under the sun, well, you know what? They both end up dying too. There's this compare and contrast. He does the same thing in the 3rd chapter. Look at, I underlined in verse 16, under the sun. I did that on purpose because that's to show what happens on the earth. That's the whole context of this book, is what happens on the earth. And then 19, what's he say? For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beast is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath. And man has no advantage over the beast, for all is vanity. Humans die, animals die, the wise die, the fool die. You just saw 2 other accounts for death. Men die, foolish men die, wise men die, animals die, the wicked die, the righteous live, the wicked live. It's all a compare and contrast of life and death. That's it. That's Ecclesiastes 9:5. I want you to look again at Ecclesiastes 9:5 and 9:6 right here. Kohelet is not making a theological statement about the human condition after death. He'll do that. He'll do that for us later, but he's not doing that here. He's not doing it in Ecclesiastes chapter 2. He's not doing it in chapter 3. Because during this time in Hebrew, the concept of a soul departing, it existed, but it was in a state of infancy. And that's not the purpose of, largely, we can say, the book of Ecclesiastes. All right, so 9:5 is thought by many scholarly communities to be kind of a sarcastic statement by the author of Ecclesiastes. He's really kind of being sarcastic and saying, you know, if you're living, you know one thing. You're going to die. And if you already died, you know one thing. You're dead, and you don't have to worry about anything anymore because you're gone. And it means you're gone from the earth. It's kind of a sarcastic statement, actually, is what he's doing. He's basically saying, the living, you're alive, and you got to worry about death. And those that are died, that have died, they're done. They no longer have that worry. That is Ecclesiastes 9:5. Build an Adventist. You build a theological concept in the Old Testament that gets fully defined in the New Testament. But you build it in the Old Testament what's in a state of infancy, reckless and foolish. But Adventism is full of reckless and foolish and dangerous doctrines. If you're an Adventist, you shouldn't be believing this nonsense. Because if Adventists get death wrong, and death is final, you're in trouble. And you're really going to be in trouble when you see the next video if you still want to be an Adventist. The New Testament provides much more in terms of defining the spirit, the soul, the afterlife, and what happens and for how long. And we're going to look at that. But there is a vague understanding in the Old Testament of an afterlife. Let's look here. Let's look at Genesis 25, Abraham's death, 25:8. It says what? Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, full of years, and was gathered to his people. I did a lot of research on this. This is not a statement of his burial. Abraham was not buried in an ancestral lot with his people. And neither was Moses or Aaron. This is a spiritual reunion, is what this verse is talking about. Look what it says. Abraham breathed his last and died a good old age. Abraham's body's in the grave. And then he was gathered to his people. That's the spirit of Abraham. Notice that, by the way, in that verse, it does not say Abraham went to sleep. Yeah, Adventist, you didn't cite that one in here, did you? Because it said Abraham died. Abraham didn't go to sleep. It didn't say that in the verse, did it? It says he died, and then he was gathered to his people. So to believe that death is some kind of sleep, awaiting a future revival, is to make God a liar. Abraham, who died thousands of years ago, is alive today, right now. And you know how I know it? Because Jesus Christ himself said it. First of all, we saw it in Genesis 25. Second, Christ himself said it to people somewhat like Adventists who don't believe in a resurrection. When Jesus is addressing the Sadducees who don't believe in a resurrection, he wants to prove that the prophets of old are still alive in his time, which is 2,000 years ago for us. And what's Jesus saying in Matthew 22:32? I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. Oh, you see what Jesus just did? He just affirmed Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are alive. And you know what? Because Jesus said it 2,000 years ago, they're alive today. That, or you can call God a liar. They're not sleeping somewhere. Abraham is not sleeping somewhere right now. Abraham is alive today. We saw it in Genesis 25:8. We heard it from the word, from the very mouth of Christ himself. So Ecclesiastes 9:5 and 9:6 is not about sleeping after death, because we already saw it in Ecclesiastes chapter 2 and chapter 3. It's always a compare against the living and the dead. The living fool, the living wise man, the living righteous, and the living wicked. It's just a contrast. But this Kohelet does have something similar to the concept of life after death that we just saw in Genesis 25. And let's look here at the very end of the book when he's talking about life and death. Verse 7, then man's dust will go back to the earth, returning to what it was. That's the grave. But then it says what? And the spirit will return to the God who gave it? Look at that verse again. Man's dust will go back to the earth. Your body's going to go into the earth, right? As we know in Genesis. To the grave you go. But spirit will return to the God who gave it. Ho ho. The author of Ecclesiastes did have some kind of rudimentary concept of an afterlife, and you see it there. So if you want to say in 9:5 that he's making death asleep, you contradict the Word of God, as you Adventists do all the time. We know that the author of Ecclesiastes knows that man has a spirit. He may not be able to define it. The Old Testament doesn't define it very well. That's fine. We're going to do that in another video. But we do know this. He did believe that man had some kind of spirit that was going back to God while the body would go into the grave. That right there, chapter 12, verse 7, just refutes Adventism alone. But let's keep reading Ecclesiastes 9 after 1 through 6. Let's go to 7 through 10. Let's read it again here. Go, now in all this, go, eat your bread with joy, drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. Let your garments always be white, let not oil be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun again, on earth, because that's your portion in life, and in your toil at which you toil under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with might, for there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which you are going. So because Ecclesiastes 9, 1 through 6 is telling us, hey, the righteous are going to live, the wicked are going to live, they're both going to die, you know, we who are alive know one thing in Ecclesiastes 9, 1 through 5. We know one thing, and that is we're going to die. The dead have been released from that burden. And that's the point of Ecclesiastes 9, 1 through 5. And then when he goes on to do 7 through 10, what he's basically saying is, don't worry, God is in control. You see the wicked prospering. You see the fool prospering, or you see the fool get all kinds of money and wealth and health, and you don't. That's the overall message of Ecclesiastes, is yet you see all these apparent contradictions of life. God is in control. Do whatever it is you're supposed to do with your work. Do it with might. Seize the day. Carpe diem. Let's look again here. Ecclesiastes 9:7. Go, eat your bread with joy and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. Bread and wine are a blessing from God. I'm going to enjoy some wine today, as a matter of fact, when I'm done with this video. Ellen White, who thinks herself above God, disapproves wine. I can see in Ecclesiastes 9:7 it says what? God approves what you do. Wine, as I studied it, is, well, it's wine. It's not grape juice. It's a blessing from God. And you're going to see that here in a minute. And by the way, wine always means intoxicating drink. Let's look again in this book here for what wine means in the Hebrew. And here we are in volume 2 of this very same book. And there it is. Yayin, wine. It's a mainstay of the sacrificial system and festivals. It's paired with sakar. It's always a paired, strong drink. Came to symbolize abundance for Israel. Wine was a sign of abundance for Israel. Now, I went ahead and I read the rest of this entry here, and with it comes all the cautions for wine. You drink too much, mister, and you lay down and your 2 daughters come in and have relations with you, and it's like, because of wine, and wine does all kinds of other wrong things. So it's always moderated consumption. But wine itself, there's nothing wrong with it. What is wrong is the unmoderated consumption of it, because it does lead to evil things if it becomes a very, very, very bad habit for some. But you can look here. I looked in the whole definition. Wine is nowhere defined as grape juice. Wine is wine. Wine's a strong drink. And it was given by God, who approves what I do. And I say, thank you very much for that, God, because I'm going to go out and have a glass of wine here shortly, because we're almost done with the video. So, in summary, everything the 28 Beliefs book presented in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, and Ecclesiastes 9:5 about death and sleep is wrong. Adventist is wrong. Death is not sleep. Sleep is death, and because sleep is death and you don't know where you're going when you die, Adventist, you better be very concerned. There's a hint of the soul existing already in the Old Testament. We saw it in Genesis 25:8. Abraham was going to be reunited. And we saw in Ecclesiastes 12:7, the body's going to go to the ground, but the spirit's going to go back to Creator God. Which, again, what happens after death is going to be addressed in the next video. But what I want to know, what I do know, is Adventism has death completely wrong, and you are misleading 20+ million people on a daily basis. Look at this last scripture verse with me. Ephesians 5:11. This is why I do what I do. Take no part in unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. Adventist, take no part in unfruitful works of darkness. The teaching in the 28 Beliefs book is unfruitful works of darkness. What I am doing here and doing now is exposing unfruitful works of darkness. This is your warning to you, Seventh-day Adventists. It's time to get out of this false religion.